Meditations with Ryan Zlomek.
Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Meditations Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Zlomek, and this is a show all about making space for conversations with interesting people just to see what we can learn from them. On today's show, we have Andy and Kristin Looney based in College Park, Maryland. They are the owners of Looney Labs, which is a card game, board game company that is making cool stuff. They made the card game Flux, Chrononauts, the Pyramid Arcade, and a million other games. But more importantly, they are community builders. They are people that use their game company as a chance to encourage others to build their own games, to be able to share the games, and to just sort of like welcome people into their creative space. We're going to talk about Rubik's Cubes and NASA and hatred of footwear and the development of some of the coolest games on the market. So without further ado, here are Andy and Kristin. Kristin and Andy, I got to tell you guys that you're two people that I feel like you've followed me through so many decades of my life, and I'll even hold this up here. I've got my first version of Flux that I picked up when I was trying to figure this out, probably 13, maybe 14, and I had played it at a summer camp. My friend bought it, and I remember going to a mall. If you guys remember what malls were, and
let's go to the mall.
Found a kiosk and found Flux, and it's just there's just something so nice about being able to connect with you guys, not only because this game has followed me for so long, but because like I feel like Looney Labs is this community that I've been unintentionally a part of for so long. And
we're happy to have you part of our community.
Yeah.
Well, it's really nice, and I was hoping that if it's okay with you guys, we'll take a step back. I've got some questions about kind of your development as game designers and as business aficionados, and then we'll make our way to kind of what you're doing now, if that all sounds great.
Well, we have all the answers, all but three.
Well, perfect. Well, I wanted to start, Kristin. I wanted to start asking you some questions, which is you were a Rubik's Cube aficionado when you were younger. Oh, still something you do?
I am. Yep.
Awesome. Well, so things that I didn't know until I kind of dug into this research, which is, you were 16 and you appeared on That's Incredible, which was a TV show that kind of highlighted interesting stuff. And your dad discovered Rubik's Cube at the American Mathematical Association. Like, what was it like having that sort of like toy tool mental process enter your life so young?
It was wonderful. I love the cube. It's been a big part of my life since those early days. I always have two of them in my bag when I travel because I find people that know how to solve it, and I love to race. I can do it in about a minute, a little under a minute, a little over, right around that. So there's plenty of people out there that can solve it faster. But I still have a very respectable time, and can beat most anybody that I find that knows how to solve it. So, which is satisfying. But yeah, no, it's wonderful. And it's a great, I mean, like it affected so many parts of my life. Like I ended up getting a minor in math in college by mistake. I was studying computer science, and when I went to that meeting at the end where they're saying, okay, here's the final stuff before graduation, the person is looking at my stuff and going, you have a minor in math. What, huh? And I didn't know I had done it. I wanted to take group theory because I wanted to study the math of the Rubik's Cube, and it had all these prerequisites, of all this advanced math. So I kept taking the math that I needed to take in order to finally take the class that would give me the math for the Rubik's Cube. So I never did anything with the minor in math, but I don't know. I learned things.
Well, that's amazing. I feel like so if I cannot solve a Rubik's Cube. I at some point I need to just quit my job for a year and figure it out. But
no. You just need to go to Kristin's Cube College. She teaches people to solve the cube using her method, which is a superior system for solving the cube.
But you need to have enough time with me to do it.
But yeah, you need to have time to she'll give you a cube and she'll teach you a thing. You go practice. It's something that's great done over a weekend or even like a week at summer camp.
Well, this sounds
or a cruise ship. I've done this on cruises before when there's enough time to come back a couple of days in a row.
Cruises are adult summer camp.
Okay. I now know what I'm doing in the summer of 2024. Thank you for helping to do that. But that's one of the questions I had for you, Kristin, was that from what I understand, like the way a lot of people learned, and I think Andy, you learned from a book, was that you kind of do like top, middle, bottom. Is it something like
Yes,
that?
exactly.
And Kristin, you figured out a way where it was kind of if you got the corners first, you were able to be a lot more efficient. Can you talk about like that process a little bit, like how that works?
The process of doing it, or how I figured it out,
The
or
process of figuring it out, and then also like why it is so much more efficient, like why your method rules.
I don't know. I mean, it is more efficient. I'm not sure why. I just have a different method of doing it. I do all of the corners first. So I don't do a solid first side. I just do the corners of that side. And then I flip it over and I do the corners on the other side until every corner on the cube is done. And then I do the opposites, the side pieces on the two opposite sides of the cube, usually the white and the yellow. And then I just have that one band down the middle left. And I have a couple of moves that do that. So I'm not, I guess it's more efficient because I think it is faster. People with that method have continued to win contests. Although nowadays, I think people just have
Oh
every
yeah.
of them
There's a
memorized.
whole different world now.
It's a
But
different
my
world
sense
now.
of it was that when you were on That's Incredible, which I watched, by the way, I remember my first time I ever laid eyes on Kristin was when she was the only girl on that TV show that I watched. But the story I recall is that you came in fifth, and Min, the guy who won, you and his system was basically the same as yours. Everybody else used the top-down approach. And the only reason you didn't do as well as Min was because everybody else was just lightning fast with their hands. And you beat a bunch of them just because your method was superior.
Yeah, my hands were never as fast at it as the other competitors, but I had a very good method, and it's more intuitive. Like it's fun to teach because there aren't anywhere near as many memorized moves, and there's several different sections of it that are more like intuitively kind of like, okay, now work on putting all these pieces in here and all these pieces here with just sort of a little, pop that up in there and pop that up in there, without it really being a specific move that you've memorized.
Whereas I did learn learn it so I can do it too. I back in the day, unlike Kristin, who's a genius who just figured it out, I learned from a book and I learned all the moves. And for a while in college, it was something I could do. It was always like, oh, you can solve it. It was fun. But at some point, I've kind of you fall out of practice, and our method is harder enough that you don't if you don't remember the moves, if you don't keep up with them, you forget. And then when I met Kristin, I figured I better learn myself. I better teach myself how to do it again because I had this vision. See, everybody in her family is into the cube. They all can do it. It's like this whole thing in the Wunderlich family. And I had this vision of being at the altar and having the question, if anyone has a reason why you shouldn't be, they shouldn't be joined. And her dad saying, well, I don't know, can he solve the cube? And I feeling I better be able to pass that test. But then I forgot it again, and for years I lapsed. But recently I've again trained myself for the third time using my same book, so that now I can challenge Kristin. And of course, it's never a challenge. She crushes me, but at least I can be somebody for her to compete against when she wants to show off her talents. And I find various ways of slowing her down. Like my favorite is to say, look, I get a 35-second head start, which of course is the amount of time it took her to solve it on That's Incredible.
So awesome. I was reading about the fact that like, Andy, you had this very vivid memory of seeing her on television years
Oh
before you
yeah.
guys met in person. And I thought was just so delightful. And Kristin, I want to ask you one other thing is you alluded to your, accidentally getting a minor in math in college, but you decided to study computer science and then eventually went into electrical engineering. If I understand that correctly, what made you decide that computer science was the sort of route that you wanted to explore?
Oh, I've been playing with computers since really early days of my early days and the early days of computers. We're old, right?
Likewise over here.
So yeah, I grew up in my dad was a professor and my mom was a teacher at the university actually she taught kids, but she also was taking classes at the university, and we had a terminal in our house that would dial into the university mainframe, before any kind of personal computers existed.
Me too.
I was, working with computers. And it just was a natural, new, exciting thing in the universe to study and to go to school for. It just seemed to make sense.
That's amazing. And Andy, you said you had a terminal in your house as well?
Oh yeah, well, my dad worked for NASA, so we were on the cutting edge of all the computer stuff as far as my contemporaries. I was playing with computers. He would take me to work. My earliest computer gaming memory is playing the Star Trek, entirely ASCII Star Trek game from the earliest days. That would like you're moving to X sector, whatever, and there's 4 Klingons. Playing that on computers at Dad's office. And then I joined the Goddard, the Explorer Post 1275 that met at Goddard, which is where I met John Cooper, and which is where I first got to play the Colossal Cave text adventure game that I attribute to inspiring both my game design career and my programming career, because I wanted to learn how to make games like that and program them was necessary. And I got into programming. I found an aptitude for it, and Dad was always bringing home terminals. Like that was the great thing. The only way to play that Colossal Cave adventure was to go to NASA and log on one of their computers. But Dad brought home a terminal. One of my fondest memories of working with Dad, playing with Dad as a kid, was the weekend he brought home a terminal. It was like Thanksgiving weekend, so we had the lock of this terminal for the whole weekend. And we were dialed in playing the adventure game together. He would type the commands and I was drawing out the map. Oh, it was a great time. But it was like he started to borrow it from work. And then he started building his own, kit computers. We had our first computer had 4K of memory, and 3K of that memory was taken up by the basic interpreter that you'd load on with a tape. So you had 1K of memory to try to write a little program, which is like 30-line basic program. Those are my earliest.
So my time, similar time frame. I was in high school. I lived in Illinois, DeKalb, Illinois, which is only about 20 minutes away from Fermilab, which is a big particle accelerator. And I was involved in these Saturday morning physics classes. I was like maybe a sophomore or a junior in high school. And a bunch of us would go to Fermilab, where the scientists from all over the world that were there doing research on this particle accelerator would fight amongst each other to get the chance to teach these Saturday morning classes to area high school kids. And so we would go to an hour lecture hearing them talk about something, and then we would stay for 2-3 hours playing adventure on the mainframe, because it was the only place you could do it. And our parents thought we were there still learning physics, and we were playing video games. They didn't know what a video game was, right? It was a completely new, interesting thing. But my favorite story about computers in that time frame, we had I think it was called a North Star Advantage, was the name of the computer that we had. This was before DOS, before PCs and Macs, any of that stuff. None of that was out yet. It ran on the operating system was CP/M, so it was before DOS existed. Anyway, but it was this computer my dad had gotten, and we were, it had similarly, very little memory and very little, whatever it could do, but it ran BASIC, the operating system BASIC, and so I'm sorry, not operating system, programming language. But I figured out how to. I was poking around, right, and nothing was encrypted or protected in any way, and I managed to find the code internal that had all the error messages. Like anytime something went wrong, it would spit out an error message, right? And I found where in it all those error messages were, and I edited them and changed them all to swear at my dad. Right? And so when he discovered this, it was the most beautiful thing, because it was like you could watch his face, right? He was so pissed off. He was so angry, but he was at the same time so proud, because what did you do? How did you how did you figure this out, right? Anyway, it was priceless. And we left it so that the computer just always was swearing when it was, because it was also, I was a kid, like I'm not supposed to swear, right? So there was so many levels of both happy and sad and wait a minute, what? Hang on, what's happening? Because he was very confused at first as to how did this brand new, very, very expensive thing that he had brought home suddenly had broken. right? And it was spitting out all these bad words. Anyway, fond memories.
Yeah, I was gonna say I like to think to myself that like, Kristin, you're the sort of like logical financial backbone behind Looney Labs, but it also sounds like you may have also invented computer security. Like that entire industry
No.
started
I'm
started
sure
with
other
you.
people had said.
We were all hacking our computers, as we call it back then.
Yeah.
It was all good fun. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So, and like, I just find this really interesting that both of you guys had these sort of like familial units where like STEM was just such a part of your household, and just like feeling like you could take those tools and that knowledge base to like this playful center is just so joyful. But both of you ended up, so both studied computer science, and you end up working for NASA, in Maryland, correct?
Yep. Yep.
And end up meeting each other there. And I was curious about like, like the space race and NASA and like all of these like narratives are always flying around. But like, what was the culture like working for NASA in the 1980s and early 90s? Like, what was the clientele you were working with? Like, what was it, what was happening there?
Oh, we had a great time. We had an amazing boss, Jim Chesney. Built he basically went out and found and hired all these very young, very smart people to come in and design ground systems with him at NASA, and it was an amazing time. It was I don't know how typical it was of the rest of anything that was going on, but we were surrounded by young, smart people, doing cool stuff, and I was designing computer chips. I was designing high-speed gate arrays at a time when no one kind of even really knew what it was. Like I started the same week that they had gotten this CAD system for making these VLSI chips, these high-speed computer chips. And I mean, high speed for then, like nowadays, nothing, big chips, like these big things, but they didn't know what to do with this new computer that showed up, and they didn't know what to do with me. And so they just sort of put us together and said, here, play with this and figure out how to do it. So I was designing chips as a co-op student, like before I'd even graduated from college, just because of the environment I was in and the chance to, Jim Chesney was amazing. He basically, would let you figure out and do and play, and he got so much good, amazing work out of so many creative people. So
I'll just second all the things that Kristin said. Jim Chesney was awesome to work for. He had a great team. We were in a great environment there to work in. We were at a time, I mean, the thing is, there's always cutting edge technology. And so at that time, we were working with cutting edge technology, and it was exciting. Like we had email addresses at Goddard. It was so cool to be sending email in a world where spam didn't exist yet, where
email
every
used to
email
be the
message you
best
got.
thing.
Yeah, it was great. Every email was meaningful and exciting. And yeah, we were getting to play with all the best, toys that the government was buying for NASA whenever it needed, within the budget that he was always getting cool new stuff. Like she said, the cool new CAD system that just came in. There was always things like that. I think it was a little more sort of kind of corporate and regular by the time we were there, but it was still kind of edge of the seat, I guess. But I really think about my dad. Again, he worked for NASA from the founding of the Goddard Space Flight Center in 1959 until the 2000s. He was there. He was a fixture, and he talks about the glory days, those 60s, when it was just anything goes to get us into all the things we were trying to do in the space program. And I'm a huge fan of the moon program and all the space programs, but I'm always comparing everything to what some aspect of the space program.
Yeah, what was were you guys part of specific divisions? Like how large was like the collaborative base that you were working with? Like was it
Code
just
521 is where we worked. I don't know how.
Code 521.1. We worked in ground systems, like she said. We were building systems there that processed data sent down by satellites and unpacked it to send off to the scientists who would do something with the data. We were moving data back and forth. Early networking. One of my big triumphs at Goddard was developing an internet-based system to move files from one of these rack computers to another in a world where None of them were computing. Everything to move files back and forth, you had to put it on a floppy. There was no internet connection. This was pre World Wide Web, obviously. And my boss made a bet with his boss that I would not be able to get two computers communicating using this new internet stuff by some certain day. And of course, I didn't know that there was this lunch bet riding on me. I was very proud when I called him in. Look, and I was able to type a message on one screen, and it popped up on the other screen. I did it. Like, oh, I guess I owe you lunch. Whoa, what's that about?
You like celebrate with Thai food or something.
To pull it back around to previous conversation, I remember vividly this time that I was sitting in my office, and well, I didn't wear shoes. Like I hated shoes. I was always against shoes. And Jim was great. He let us do whatever we wanted because we were doing science. We were making cool stuff, and he didn't care about whether or not I was wearing shoes, right? But I suddenly was getting called down to the main conference room, and like I was like, do I have any shoes here? Because it's like there are other places in the place that you really do need to, and I was like, what do they need? Like, they're having some big meeting with people from out of town, and like, oh man, are they going to make me talk about my chip development? Like I'm not finished with this thing I'm doing. Is like I'm all freaked out and scared. Like I get down there, I open the door, and there's this room full of people, right? And this guy opens up his briefcase, and he pulls out a stopwatch, and he pulls out a Rubik's Cube, and he says, okay, we want to see it. Like, oh, okay, fine. I guess I'm not going to be in trouble for not wearing shoes, right? So,
yeah. The thing is, you had gotten into trouble before about wearing shoes. Next time you tell this story, you should include in the first part when Jim had to justify to David Howell that, well, does it say anything in the regulations that she has to wear shoes? Well, I can't find anything that says that. Well, then she doesn't have to wear shoes. But
over the time, several people turned me into health and safety, and then health and safety would come down and talk to Jim, and Jim would say, well, does it say it? Like, and they don't, oh, okay, so fine.
She's one of my top engineers. I don't care if she wears shoes. So, so the idea that you might be getting in trouble again over the shoe thing, but no, it's the cube thing.
That's so funny. It's just interesting because, like, in my ignorant perspective of NASA, I don't think of it as a playground. Like, I think of it as a place where, like, people come in and they do math computations, and we go, we get this result, and we kind of, push the needle forward as much as possible. And it's just like, I love this insight because it's not something that, like, we often have a purview on. You guys have been like at the ground floor of the shenanigans of NASA.
Well, NASA is all about R&D. I mean, we're figuring out, we haven't worked there in years and years and years, but we, the NASA people, are all about figuring out how to do things that have never been done before. And
we actually, I actually, when I left NASA, I left with 23 people from our group that we've been working at for years. We developed this telemetry system that would, like he said, we would gather data from the satellites and process it and send it off to the side. We developed that system, and then we all left NASA and commercialized that as a product through technology transfer. Like the government, taxpayers' money pays for everything that goes on there, and everything in there belongs to the taxpayers, and you can do stuff with it. So we through technology transfer, took all of the stuff we'd been working on and came out and made a company out of it. Now we did that for some years, and it fizzled and went away, and it never became anything big, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of exciting cutting edge stuff.
But the point Kristin is making is that R&D is a part and parcel to NASA, and since everything's owned by the people, NASA used to at least make a big deal about inventions that they had made that were then rolling out for the public good. They used to publish an annual big color binder called Spinoff, talking about how commercial applications that had developed things like Velcro that we have everywhere now, that I don't know if it was invented for the space program, but it certainly took off there.
I wonder if that publication, that Spinoff thing, still exists. I would think it probably does.
I would think so. Yeah. I just haven't thought about it in years. But back in the day, they would give us one every year when it came out.
Yeah.
And they used to give us a sticker, a patch sticker for every mission when it was about to fly too. It was fun working for NASA.
Well, I guess that's one question I'm curious about is like we'll talk about the culture of Looney Labs later, but like it sounds like the culture of NASA was really important. And you talked about Jim as being somebody who like really encouraged that. How do you guys think that you added to that culture? Like how do you think that you impacted the culture of NASA while you were there?
I don't know how much we impacted that culture other than that we were part of it and enjoying it and being part of it. But for no question about it, that all of that went on there influenced the future corporate culture of Looney Labs.
Yeah.
Like that's something I learned from Jim as a mentor was how to get a group of people excited and all marching together in the same direction towards some common goal of what are you trying to do and having a huge amount of fun doing it.
Jim was an awesome boss, and he wasn't a boss, he was a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I am the leader I am today because of him. He's one huge influence on me, watching how he energized that group of people. I mean, he took the whole team out to lunch on a regular basis on his dime, right? Because the government isn't going to pay for that, right? And it started off being every week, and after a while, it was every couple of weeks, and then maybe it was every month because the group kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was a lot of pizza, right? But he kept that culture going, and at one of those lunches, we gave everybody a T-shirt with this mugshot that's of him, that said "Our fearless leader," and that I had actually, like, I don't know if you know that this is how the government works, but there's budgets, and at the end of the fiscal year, if you haven't spent the money, you're going to get less next year. And so there's always this window of time where it's like, what do we need to buy? Because we need to spend some money. And I actually bought this big, huge, expensive scanner before scanners existed in order to digitize that picture of his face that we ended up ultimately putting on that T-shirt. I also got the first CD burner before that existed and was a thing because I needed to get this giant file that we had made for like the soda machine. Do you remember that, Andy? Like
Of
we
course,
made
the
this
lovely
art
beverage
for the soda
machine.
machine, and I needed to get it across town to a printer to make it, and there was no way to transfer a file that big. But there was this new technology that was you could burn onto a CD that CDs existed, but being able to burn them with your own data on them didn't exist, except it did, but only in these really expensive things. And so I was rallying for, no, we need this, and we did need it for real reasons, but I needed it for that silly soda machine.
That's amazing. Is the and I don't want to belabor this too much longer, but like just in regards to leadership strategies, like so you talked about the fact that like Jim, you guys felt would like advocate for you, and especially not wearing shoes or whatever, and then really wanted to make sure that people were kind of taken care of, and that you were encouraged to try new technology. Was there any other sort of like leadership things that he did, or corporate culture elements that you really just appreciated about his journey and his leadership?
Well, one thing I know we still use is his 2-week rule. He would always, whenever there's some sort of deadline approaching or some client demanding something or problem that needed to be solved, he would always say, "We'll have that for you in about 2 weeks." It was just the right amount of time to buy some time, but seemed like it's coming pretty soon. That would make people say, "All right, I'll give you that
2 weeks.
time." 2
2
weeks.
weeks. I'll have it for you in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And of course, it's not really 2 weeks. That's just what he said, but it was, yeah, 2 weeks.
I just want to say that, having reached out to you guys for an interview, you scheduled me within a week and a half. So I feel like I'm in the inner circle now.
Well, there you go.
Because if you don't do it right away, then when are you going to remember to get back to it and do it when there's so much going on? And it isn't like it was in those early days. Nowadays, email is broken. I hate email. I used to love it. It was the best new thing. I loved email so much when it was new. I hate it so much now. It's like it's so sad. There's so much spam. Even with like sophisticated tools to try to clear it out and make it not so and do all sorts of sophisticated stuff in your email, it's still completely overwhelming how much junk sneaks in that you have to say, no, I don't ever want to see that again. Right? There's so much junk in your email. It's like
it's all advertising. Advertising ruins everything. I was on a panel this weekend at a convention, and we were talking about this, and two of the other panelists said these things about how annoying it is now when you're watching a video and how it'll just take forever for them to get to the point. And then finally they'll say, it's like it's been teaser, and here finally after 5 minutes, here's the answer to the question that's posed in the title of the video. And then meanwhile, you'll have a web page. It's like, clickbait article, and you have to scroll and scroll and scroll before finally you get the nugget of information that you clicked on. And both of these, as I've been pointed out, are ruined by advertising, because on the video side, they drag it out so it can be long enough to get that autoplay ad that finances the whole thing. And with the web page, it's all about needing people to plug in all those stupid ads in a long article so you get all those click eyeballs. And it's just so maddening. It's spam, ruins everything. And advertising is the evil that anyway, I hate it.
And here we come from, I'm the business and the sales and marketing side of Looney Labs. Andy designs the games, and then I do everything else. And he hates advertising. He hates marketing. He doesn't care if anybody, well, he wants people to buy, he wants
It
people
would
to
be
have
nice.
the games. He doesn't really care if they buy them. He wants to have them and play them. But yeah.
I'm not motivated by money. Money is useful, but I don't. As long as I have enough to do the random things I want to do, which are, I keep my needs modest as much as I can. And I want to be able to create and make things, and I don't want to get hung up on the bills.
Well, let's start to talk about creating and making things. So, Andy, you leave NASA and you end up working for a company that's making software for the 3DO system by Panasonic, if
That's
I
correct.
understand that correctly. And you designed a game called Icebreaker.
Yep.
And I was curious about like how you ended up kind of discovering that project. And this was, if I understand correctly, kind of like your first foray into professional commercial game design. Is that correct?
All true. And it's accidental in the same way that I kind of accidentally invented the pyramid system in a short story I wrote. I went to work. So after I worked for NASA, and I was getting bored. I wanted to do something else, and I heard about this opportunity with some contacts I'd made in the live role playing game world, who were starting up this company to make games for this new video game platform that was going to be all the rage, the 3DO. And of course, obviously, nobody even remembers it. It was crushed by the PlayStation a year or two later. But at the time, we were buying into the idea that this might really be a thing. And it was funded enough for us to come and work there for a while, trying to make games for it. And I was hired as a programmer. But I didn't really have a project yet. There was this kind of like nebulous idea. We're going to design games. We got to figure out how to design games. It was all this, blind leading the blind, weird project. And so I was hired as a programmer, and I started trying to figure out, there was this vague idea that we'd do a kind of isometric perspective, top-down view game of like giant robots running around or something. And so I made this graphic engine to do that. And for the things to make the game be featuring, I can't draw giant robots. So I drew the thing close to my heart, and stuck in my brain, the pyramid gaming pieces. And so I made one that was kind of driving around on its side, and another that was that you could smash into pyramids with to test collision detection, and to other that you like. Now I made it shoot a fireball, and made that I could track the fireball moving across the screen and see what it would hit things. And okay, some things it hits, it destroys. And then I made
all of this was just to learn the tool and to build the things that were going to later be something else.
Yeah.
Right?
And then
Yeah.
I needed bad guys, so I made other little pyramids scooting in and out that would be trying to get you, And suddenly I had a whole little game where you're driving around smashing pyramids and trying to clear the field of the pyramids without really even trying. I had invented this game, and suddenly I had all my coworkers are hanging around my cubicle wanting to have a round at trying to blow up all the pyramids. And the management then says, let's make a game out of that. Everybody seems to like it. So suddenly I became a game designer as well as the programmer on the project. And there were all kinds of other projects going on, including this epic overscaled thing called Blue Star, which is its own huge story. And it went nowhere. Millions of dollars spent on a game that went nowhere. But for that story, call up and talk to Mr. Keith Baker, game designer of Eberron and Gloom. He can tell you all about Blue Star, and which also featured an appearance by LeVar Burton. But anyway, that never came out. But Icebreaker did, like the only game actually released by this giant studio that had 150 people working for it one year, and the next year most of them were fired. But I working away in my cubicle with a couple of other people helping me do music and animating the pyramids that I created to look really cool. We brought it out, Icebreaker, and It's still a great little game. I still play it now. If you
Fun
can
little
get
Easter
yourself a
egg.
3DO, I'll send you a disc.
Fun
Uh,
little Easter egg about this is when you die, it says "uh-oh," and they brought me into the studio to record my voice saying "uh-oh"
so
for when
what
you
I under
die.
so hold on. So what I understand is that Kristin and LeVar Burton have done sound work at the same studio. That's
That's
a
true. Yeah.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
you're going to be the next Reading Rainbow host. I can see it. Um,
Back in the 90s. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. The year was 1995, I guess, on all of that.
Well, so this is, from a scalability standpoint, I love the fact that like this is a game that was designed like you designed a game while trying to test functions within a game that you would hope to design eventually,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. And it was released, I think, on a demo disc that had 5 levels that people could try, and then when you got
Yep.
the final game, there was like 150 levels. I mean, were
Correct.
you what was the timeline by which you were programming this? And then did you design all 150 levels? Like, or were other
Oh, no,
people
no,
brought in to
no.
help with that? Like, how did that function?
Well, again, Icebreaker became kind of the darling project at Magnet. Everything else was being funded by contracts for licenses that didn't go anywhere and stupid ideas from the outside. And suddenly, one of the programmers had just created this thing that got funded somehow. So everybody really liked it and wanted to help out and wanted to see it go far. And it was kind of, I was kind of a celebrity around this ever growing company, because I'd gotten my project created out of nowhere without even trying. And so all kind of people were always hanging around, playtesting the levels. And so we made a level designing tool that I think the tool was on the Mac. So because we were all using Macs at the time, and like we would do our programming on a Mac and then download it to this test unit for the 3DO. But so we had various different people were cranking out levels. Keith Baker designed a bunch of them, some of the hardest. Because in those days, Keith and I had side-by-side desks. He was working on a different project, but that's when our friendship really kind of cemented. I probably did maybe 25% of the levels.
That's amazing. It's really cool. What so it sound that so for those who are unaware of what the console market looked like in the 90s, the 3DO, I very vividly remember walking into a Blockbuster Video and seeing the clearance bin of all the 3DO games that no one had rented. Um
Oh,
and I was still mad I didn't buy them.
oh
But
yeah,
um
instant collection.
Absolutely. But that system didn't take off. Panasonic was unsuccessful. Sony ends up taking over the market, and I think the Sega Saturn was around that same time too. So
Yep.
there's a lot of competing systems. Did you voluntarily choose to leave the company and then decide that Looney Labs was going to be your next thing, or like how did you decide that starting your card game company was going to be the next project?
Well, my first year at Magnet was one of the greatest years of my life. I had so much fun creating that game, becoming part of this team that was doing it, in a company that felt like it was building and growing to gonna be a great thing. My game came out, and then they didn't quite know what to do with me. I didn't have another project. I started programming a sequel to the Icebreaker, but since the 3DO was already the writing was already on the wall by then. In fact, we were starting to shift over to doing PlayStation games. And at the end, they assigned me to a terrible project for that I didn't want to be working on, and so the second year was like one of the worst years of my life. It was so disappointing because now my game is out, but not really going anywhere. They don't have anything new for me to do. I'm just goofing off at work all day. Meanwhile, everyone around me is getting laid off, mass layoffs, a couple of different rounds of very painful. First, like a daily layoff, and then another one where it was the execution style, half the team, you went with this big company-wide meeting, and half of them went this way and they were all fired, and half of them went this way and your job is still in here. It became so miserable. Even though I was in the room that stayed, I didn't really have a job. I didn't want to be there anymore. So I ended up quitting a job I said I would never quit.
Interesting. And did you have pardon me if my timeline is wrong, but was Flux the first game that you guys released for Looney Labs, or were the Pyramid games?
As
The
Looney
pyramids are
Labs,
what got
Flux was the first. Yes.
as Looney Labs, Flux was first. But we started with Ice House with a kind of pretend company, a side hobby company, really, called Ice House Games, about making pyramids for the game Ice House. And we tinkered away with that in our spare time for 8 years. But then when we invented Flux, we said we need to start a fresh company for this to publish this game. And that's when Looney Labs was born.
Interesting. Let's talk about Ice House real quick. Like what so it was this little hobby project, and that's a series, that's a system that you can develop games for.
It is
Correct?
now.
It is now.
Well,
Oh, no, it was
yeah.
not at the time.
No, well, it started as a story device. So Kristin talked about how she minored by accident in mathematics. I minored in English because I developed a knack for writing, and I wanted to tell stories, and I thought maybe I could become a writer someday. But I majored in computer science because I wanted to have a job, and you know the English thing was just my hobby. And so I wrote a short story in which I described an imaginary board game and people enthusiastically playing it. And that led to Ice House and everything, because people around me who read the story were like, we want to play that game. And my friend John Cooper then created a game that worked kind of like the one in my story, using pieces another friend named John Montry had made for me, like the one in the story. But even that, although that game held our interest for 8 years and was the basis of the first few print runs of games we ever made, it's kind of, I compare it to a dinosaur. It was a fearsome beast that used to rule the land, but is now basically extinct. Nobody plays it anymore. But it held our interest for all those years because it was nothing like anything else, and we wanted a game you could play with these pyramids. And then when I said, maybe we should try inventing a different game that used these pyramids. And in retrospect, I realized the pyramids are incredibly useful as a game design toolkit. And I can't believe it took us 8 years to figure that out, because there are now hundreds of games for those pyramids. And one of the changes that made that usability even more dramatic was when we finally got them manufactured and made them hollow so they could stack, which was never part of the original vision. We wanted solid pieces that would have some heft to them, and kind of rejected the idea of
We were
hollow
told
pieces.
in no uncertain terms by all of the molding places that I was talking to is that you can't make these solid. That they would take up, first of all, too much material, so they would be way more expensive because of how much plastic was in them, and also that they would bow on the edges, they would suck in, they just wouldn't
It wouldn't look
manufacture.
good. Yeah.
And so because we were so intent on wanting them to be solid, we made them with the thickest walls that we could get away with, which gives them enough heft, and I think really is part of what makes them so good. And I don't know if you yourself have played with our pyramids, but they're just delightful the way they stack and nest, the way they fit together. And because of the really thick wall, they stand up on one piece on top of the other really nicely, sort of satisfying in a way that if we had just said, oh, hey, they're going to be hollow, they would not have, they wouldn't have come out anywhere near as good if we weren't fighting so hard to make them solid. Even though we had to go hollow, we went a very thick hollow.
But that
Yeah.
was when we finally managed to get them manufactured. The key turning point in our history was July 24th, 1996, so Kristin had been traveling around trying to find a manufacturer to get these dang things made, and was coming back with answers. A, like she says, they got to be hollow, and B, it's going to cost you $12,000 for the molding and so forth. And we're like,
Just for the
that's,
mold.
that's a lot of money.
Back in the 90s, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, so we couldn't do that. It wasn't worth it. And that was also one of the things that made us have that kind of come to Jesus moment, that Ice House is just not that good of a game. If we want to do something with these pyramids, we've got to invent other games and come up with one that has that kind of killer app factor that the pyramids now have with a lot of the amazing games that are available for it now.
But that was a few years later, because when I got back from that trip, and I said to Andy the night before that date that he says, that very, very important date in our life, I came back and I said, we can't do this. It's too expensive. The game's not good enough. It's just, can you design a card game? You can give me a card game. I could get that manufactured. I could put that in stores. I could make that happen. I can't do this. We can't like mortgage our house, to pay for a mold for a game that, this isn't going to work. And the next day he handed me a memo, which was the design for Flux.
Fascinating. I want to, for listeners at home who have not played with any of these pyramid games or understand the Ice House pieces, I just want to talk about them very briefly, which is they're these plastic pyramids, which are three different sizes, right? And they, as they pointed out, sit nicely on top of one another. The bottom is there's nothing there, so you can kind of stack them. But it started off as a game and then has turned into a whole community of game designers who use these tools to create new games, and Andy comes up with different ones and Kristin comes up with different ones, and it's become like a whole system, and we'll come back to that shortly. But so all right, so Ice House doesn't work, and Andy, you come up with Flux, or you at least present Flux to Kristin the next day. How had that, is that a game that had been kind of germinating in your mind for a long time, or was that something that just it came out because it needed to?
Yeah, it came out because it needed to. So a lot of my best designs just kind of seem to burst fully formed out of my head, like Athena from Zeus's skull. It's, and I don't even know where it comes from. It's just suddenly like, ooh, what if we did this? And so, like she said, she asked me to design a card game. I was like, all right, what would I do in a card game? And I started thinking about, well, some of it was the lessons learned from Ice House, which is such a chore to teach. There's so much explanation that you have to go into. And I'm like, okay, I want a game that you don't need to have any explanation at all. Just we start with almost nothing, we build from that. I can kind of teach it as I go. And I wanted a game. I like the idea of a game with an ever-changing rule. I mean, with an ever-changing goal, a dynamic goal. There was a Cadon Enterprise games called Proteus that had kind of the way you played it change, and the winning conditions depending on placement of pieces. And I just designed a pyramid game, my third pyramid game called Trice, that had a kind of the winning conditions depended on where pieces were played. So I had this idea of a game that the goal would change. And then I thought, wow, people love to be able to change the rules. What if, oh, and also I played a game called Gnomic, which is a game in which the game is making up the game. It's a completely theoretical game. And it frankly doesn't usually work because people, it's like, it's so open-ended. You can make up any rule at all, and then as long as everybody else agrees to it, it's a rule. It's too broad. So I said, what if there was a game kind of like Gnomic, but you can only change the game in these certain ways that I will prescribe in advance and that are written out on cards so that you can't just say you're making it up. And so I can change the rules little by little as you go. And then I thought, I need some things that you're trying to move around and have. And I think the inspiration for that came from the tarot deck, because in the tarot deck, you have the major arcana that are each of these interesting things: the sun, the moon, death, taxes. Well, not taxes, but the emperor, the chariot, strength, all these conceptual sort of things. And so I kind of think milk and cookies, indeed. And so my original set of keepers is kind of my modern American major arcana, if you will, featuring indeed, the sun and the moon and death, all of whom are actual tarot major arcana cards.
And so a thing that you don't know about Andy, but he is a night owl. He tends to work late into the night and sleep during the day whenever he's able to. And so I had told him this, and I went to bed, and he stayed up all night and worked on this. And I got up the next morning, and he handed me this memo, and he went to bed, and I took it, and this was 96. I think, yeah, 96.
Yeah, 1996. Yep.
Desktop publishing didn't exist, or it did in its earliest forms. It was not a thing. And I actually did the layout for the game using a relational database program for the Macintosh called Panorama. I think that was Panorama. I think that was what it's called.
Panorama. Yeah.
And so it was a database, because if you think about what the Flux card looks like, right? It's got this text in this spot here, and this thing here, and this thing here, and that, right? How it's designed. And all of that was just this database where, I put in the text that needs to go in this place, this place, this place. And this database had a way of outputting a graphical look of the data in the thing. And so I made this layout of the information on each of the cards using this database program, so that when he woke up, we had a deck that we could actually try and play. like within days, like a day and a half, we had a playable prototype that we started playing. And it's kind of like what Andy was talking about with the game he had, the icebreaker, everyone was around his desk, wanting to play it. It's like this Flux game was the same thing. It's like, oh my God, this is fun. People constantly wanting, everywhere we took it, everything we did with it, it was magic. It was this addictive fun. Oh my God, this is amazing. Wait, did you bring that game? I want to play that game. You
Yep.
know.
Yeah, for people who are unfamiliar with Flux, I just want to contextualize it a little bit. So, the tagline is it's the card game with ever-changing rules. And when you start the game, it's very simple directions. Draw one, play one. You'll have 3 cards in your hand, draw a card, pick one of the 4, play it. And what you play might be the goal of the game. These are the constraints we have to have in order to win. Or these are new rules. Maybe it's going to be draw 2, play 1, or something like that, or an additional rule. Or you'll have something like a keeper, which is an asset that you have, something that can help you reach the goal. And as you play, the game gets a little loony, as you might say, a little chaotic. And there's action cards where all of a sudden, you just sort of do what's on the card, but it's so accessible. And it's so wacky as the game continues. And there's just this moment of elation that you get if you're playing the game where like, I've got X amount of cards and I can play 3. And if I play them in this order, maybe I can win, or I can get closer to winning. That just sort of takes over you. And Kristin, I'm curious about, like, you get this memo, Andy goes to Dreamland. Like, was there any editing that you sort of found yourself doing while you were starting to create this deck, or was
No,
it
not
like
at that stage at all. No, I basically took his design, plugged it into the database, and spit out cards, so that we
She
could try
told
it.
me, she said, okay, here's the design. We worked together what fields would be where, and then she said, okay, make a database of all the cards you want, and then my software will pull in that database and print out these cards. And so I created the database, and then then we got busy with the scissors.
That's amazing. And you guys were just did you send it to a printer and have to
No,
like
no,
twiddle
no,
your
no. We
thumbs,
just
or you
printed on. We've always had like some kind of computer, Oh, and just to correct you a little bit, Kristin, we did have early, desktop publishing tools back then. We were using them to publish Hypothermia. I think Ready,
Okay.
Set, Go
Right, ready, set, go. Yeah.
was
I
the
guess it
tool.
was just easier to do it in the
But
database.
laying
Yeah.
out a card, laying out something of 80 cards, we didn't know how to do that. And you had the idea of using Panorama to kind of generate them rather than doing card layout that is now part and parcel of what we do. I feel like I've lost the thread of what I was going to say, or there was a question. I don't want to remember what it was now.
That's okay. We'll move forward. I guess what I'm curious about is like the initial play testing phase to determine like this will work. We need to make these alterations, and then deciding to eventually get this thing manufactured. Like what was that sort of interim period like? Like what did you have to do? What steps did you have to get into place? You were hoping that Looney Labs was going to grow into something. I think, Kristin, you were still working at the time in
Well,
aerospace, right?
this was before we actually started Looney Labs.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
We
made
both were still
Flux.
full-time jobs at this point.
Yeah, we made Flux, and we actually, like, my initial reaching out to printers and stuff was while I was still Icehouse Games, but we realized somewhere in there, like, hang on a minute, there were more people involved in that, and this has nothing to do with the pyramids, and this is its own thing. And we were doing some freelance work that Andy was doing with my company at that point and stuff. So that's when we formed Looney Labs. But this was, again, before the internet. I mean, the internet existed, but before the World Wide Web, before all of the stuff that everything at your fingertips to find. I actually went to the library at Goddard at NASA, and looked in the
Thomas Registry.
Thomas Registry. Yes, the Thomas Registry, which is this huge, encyclopedia, many, giant books, 20 books series of what it takes to fill it all out. It's basically everybody who manufactures anything in the United States and what they make. Nowadays the Thomas Registry is online and you can look it up that way there, but this was before that existed, and you had to go to a library that was big enough to have all these books because they were indexed by company. You could look up a company and see what they made. You could look it up by location. You could look it up by thing, and so I looked for card printing, right? Playing card printers. And we found a company in New York that wasn't too far from us, and we contract with them to make the game. And it actually was this huge mess. It was like it was supposed to be done, and they kept stalling, and we couldn't figure out what was happening. We were supposed to have it the first decks before Christmas. We were going to give them to our family and friends as a Christmas present, and they actually ended up getting them to us just in time. We got like a dozen copies without the edges rounded, like square edged. There's like a dozen copies of that first Flux that exist in the world with square edges that are the most rare collectible Flux games there are, that I don't even know if anybody still has them. We were given to friends and family back then. But what happened, the reason that they weren't cut is the company we were working with was actually a broker, and they were hiding that fact from me. I didn't know it. They were not the manufacturer. They were a broker that was taking the money and giving it to somebody else to do it, and then giving it to us, which is a thing, but I didn't know it. And they were also in the process of going out of business. And so they were taking the money that we gave them to finish the previous project for somebody else, and then hoping to get another project from someone to pay for finishing my project. And we actually discovered this because we were like, they were clearly, something was going on. The communication was like, I don't know what's happening, but there's something here. And it was close enough to drive to. So
Right,
we
well, they-
got the car and we drove.
They bought some time with us by sending us those dozen square cut decks, but then it's like, now it's February, it's March. We're like, we need our decks. Why aren't we getting our product? What's going on? And the surefire way to get somebody's attention, now you can call them all day, they just ignore that. You drive up to their office and sit in their office and say, I'm not leaving until I get an answer. You will get an answer.
Right. So we went and we drove up and we sat in their tiny little office that was clearly not a printing company.
Yeah.
Right? Trying to find out, okay, well, and they finally got rid of us by giving us the name and address of the place. It was probably in between where they were and where we lived, I don't know, someplace else further south in New York, whatever. They gave us the information as to where the actual factory was that was making our cards and that had the stuff. And they gave us that address to get us to leave. And so we drove there. And we talked to them, and that's when we found out more about what was going on. And they said, look, we haven't been paid to do the finishing, so we're not going to do the finishing. And we actually ultimately decided to pay again. We had already given the first company the money for the whole run, but we paid the actual printer again to finish the process and finish manufacturing them and to give us the product, which is really good we did, because not long after that, the original people we were working with, declared, I don't know if they declared bankruptcy, but whatever, it all went to the courts, and we would have never gotten our product at all. We would have gotten nothing instead of just paying a little extra to finish it.
Yep.
But we got it finished. And then I think it was that summer that we then took it to Origins.
Yep.
Which was the first time we showed it to the public. We got a little 10x10 booth, painted the whole thing black and white. Andy took pictures of my eye and put it on these 3 TV screens with these weird sort of visual kind of stuff, because we wanted to be something that would draw people in to get attention. And we made promo cards that said, the television is watching you, that had the TV and the eye as the promo we were handing out in the booth, so that I could stand in front of the booth handing out promo cards. Come try this game, and Andy was sitting there doing demos while we sold decks. And that was when we really learned just how big of a thing this was that we had on our hands.
And can I just ask a clarifying question real quick? The promo card that you were giving out, that was a card that could be added to the game.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's something you guys do a lot, which I just wanted to clarify. So thank you.
This was the very first one, because when we were talking to that printer, he showed us the card sheets, right? And there were, like 6 or 7 or 8, I don't know, some number.
Oh, like 10, like a whole row of 10 cards along the bottom. And because we were working with this broker, they hadn't really told us how things work. And so the actual printer was just throwing these extra cards away, or planning to, because they hadn't been told to do anything with them, and the layout hadn't been done directly. And when we got there and said, no, we'll take all those blank cards, since we drove up in the truck anyway. Oh, and I want to clarify the geography here. So the broker was located in Albany, New York, and the printer was in Brooklyn, and we're in Washington, D.C. So we drove past New York to Albany, to their tiny little office. And then when they got rid of us, we drove to Brooklyn to the actual factory. Oh my gosh, this is what we're expecting, an actual printing factory with, yes. And it was so like, oh my, wow, discovery that everything was a lie and that here's where the work is really built on. But they had printed them. We just needed to pay double for the cutting costs, and we could take them home. And yeah, and so we had all these blank cards, and Kristen figured out how to find a local printer who could print onto these blank cards to make a new card for us to distribute that was connected to this video connection, kinetic art thing that I'd made featuring Kristin's eyeball, the programming of which I did on the 3DO.
That's true. Yeah, but that was the very first promo card we ever did, and it's amazing that it exists. This was in '96, right? And the technology that was used, because the cards were already cut. They said Flux on the back, and they were completely blank on the front, and they were already printed. Like they were cut. Like and
with rounded corners and
I
everything.
couldn't do this today. But I found a local printing press, a company that had this ancient machine that they don't even use anymore, that they could figure out how to feed these tiny little cards through this machine and print onto each card individually, right? The promo thing on it. So anyway, very first promo card we ever made. We've made hundreds of them at this point. That's a part of what we do to promote the game, and we've done that literally for 28 years.
That's great. So what was the so Flux, I'm assuming, is beloved at origin. I mean, it's got to be, right? Your eyeball was there, Kristin. It's the greatest selling point, right? So what was, once you guys made it back, do you have any idea what your initial print run was? Like how many units you made?
5,000.
Yeah, 5,000.
And how long does it take to sell 5,000 units of Flux? Like,
well, now we go through those pretty fast.
A couple months.
But yeah, I mean that one print run kept us going for a long time because we were so small at the point. I don't know exactly, but just to give the chronology a little bit more. So Kristin asked me to design Flux on July 24th. I did. That spring, a few weeks later, just like a week later, we were at Greg Hill's birthday party demoing it, and people were like, "This is great." We quickly knew we needed to print this right away, and by the following November, we had the files at the printer. It's kind of amazing to think about because, again, before Christmas, we had those first decks in our hands. By that spring, we finally had the real decks, and now we're like, okay, how do we sell these things? And so we went to this convention that we'd been to before, but never like this. The Origins Convention, which at the time was in Columbus, I guess. And everyone there was like, "Hey, this is great. Are we going to see you at Gen Con?" And we're like,
what's Gen Con? Right. Yeah.
And so suddenly we're in the circuit of exhibitors and vendors who are like, go to each from one convention to the next because it's just 3 weeks till Gen Con. And we're like, we need to figure out how to go to Gen Con. And at Gen Con, Kristin worked.
It's too late to get a booth at this point, but I found somebody there that was willing to sell the game in their booth and let us be there demoing it. And so we were at Gen Con demoing it. And at that point, we knew we had a hit on our hands, and we both had full-time jobs. And we really kind of wanted to just be a design studio where we would make games and then find somebody to publish them. And so we started looking for a publisher. We actually, I got back from Gen Con and I sent it out to a whole bunch of places. Like one of the things I did at Gen Con was, okay, who publishes games? Like I started trying to figure out who should I talk to, right? Because I was back at another big convention where all the publishers were. And I think we probably sent it to maybe 6 or 7 places that I kind of found a bunch of options. And apparently I did that completely wrong. I had no idea, but apparently the etiquette is you send it to one place, you get a yes or a no, and then you send it to another place and you get a yes or a no. I didn't know that. I didn't know, right?
We had a hit on our hands. We just wanted to share it. Yeah, we wanted to try to create a bidding war,
Yeah, I said, hey, we were just at Origins and Gen Con. Oh my God, I got a hit on my hands. I need a publisher. Are you interested? And I sent that out to a bunch of places and I got 3 contracts. I got a bidding war. I got 3 people trying to buy it. It was US Playing Cards, Steve Jackson Games, and Iron Crown Enterprises. All handed me contracts within months saying, we want to publish this. And I am so glad we picked Iron Crown Enterprises. Steve wanted it so bad. Steve Jackson wanted it so bad. But he was going to change it. He was going to make all new art. He was going to make it his own. He was going to turn it into something else. And he would have done amazing things with it, I'm sure. This was before he made Munchkin. he would have done a great stuff, but it wouldn't have been ours, and we would never have gotten it back.
Yep.
Whereas Iron Crown took it, they loved Andy's art. They didn't change it much at all between our very first edition and the next one. They changed the card size and they added some color, not to
the stripes. They just added the color stripes.
But the color stripe, and they put some color on the box. Like the one you held up, I could tell was an Iron Crown edition, because it's got the Flux logo is in color. And they got it into distribution. Like they had access. They were a publisher that had, and they were kind of in the process of struggling, trying to figure out what to do next. And then they lost the
Tolkien
license and the Tolkien license, and that had been such a huge part of their business that they couldn't survive without it.
Yeah, the Iron Crown in their name is a Tolkien reference. They were the company for Middle Earth themed games, and then when the movies happened, the Tolkien estate pulled the rights, and that was like their biggest thing. And so
they only had Flux for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I don't. It wasn't very long. But they got it into distribution. They got it out there. They got it so that it existed. I got it into Barnes and Noble during that window of time when they were selling it. So it got it started, and then they declared bankruptcy. And the way that works with a contract is all the rights reverted back to us. And we had just had enough time to realize we don't like being in the back seat when somebody else is driving. Like we made a mistake in licensing it. We want to do this. And so we got it back and we didn't look back. That was when we quit our day jobs and jumped off the cliff and decided, hey, let's try to make a game company.
At the time,
Labs.
At the time, we thought that was the dream, to create a game, create enough of a run of it to get people interested and build up interest in it, and then license it to another company and just sit back and enjoy the incoming royalties, right?
No.
It wasn't like that at all. We were frustrated by the things they were doing or weren't doing to promote it that we thought they should do or do differently. And we just, like Kristin, realized we wanted to be in the driver's seat. And so we're so glad that we suddenly got the chance to get back in there. And like she said, we've never looked back.
That's interesting. So Kristin, how did I'm assuming you said you got it into Barnes and Noble and you were kind of familiarizing yourself with the distribution networks. At what point, so you guys get it back, had you already at that point kind of formed the company Looney Labs? Were you ready to go? Where you're all right, as soon as we get this is how we're going to hit the ground running with this game? Or was there was there sort of a lull in the middle where you guys had to kind of figure things out?
Well, they had gotten it into distribution, so the stores and the distributors had started selling it, and so I was able to just keep filling those orders, and then while I figured out everything else, right? So there wasn't really a lull. It was we're going to keep this rolling, and we started then making new versions of it, pretty quick.
Not right away. At first we thought let's now we'll make other games, and we invented Aquarius. And we finally brought out the Ice House set that we wanted to make, but couldn't afford until Flux had put some money in our pocket to fund that $12,000 mold. And Chrononauts around then. And all these other games were meeting with a certain amount of success, but nothing like Flux. Flux was the thing that was clearly the hit. And that it wasn't until a few years later, really. I mean, there was Stoner Flux that we thought more of as something to help the legalization movement rather than branching out with Fluxes. It wasn't, frankly, until Robin came along and was promoting us to do Zombie Flux and Monty Python Flux.
Yeah, I had been asking you for Zombie Flux for a while, and you just couldn't. You couldn't figure it out. You can't make zombies into keepers because nobody wants zombies. Yeah. And it was when he came up with the idea of adding another card type, which was the creeper. The zombies are the creepers, and that made it click in his head, and he figured out how to do it.
But that was literally 10 years later, because but
I guess it was Stoner Flux was the first different one we made, and that one was more as a legalization thing.
Again, we had this idea that Normal might want to release it as a kind of fundraiser for the movement. That didn't go anywhere. In fact, we even had a meeting with them and this isn't going to go anywhere. But it's still, that was the first themed version. But I think the real start of the many versions of Flux was really Zombie Flux. And that, as I started to say, that was 10 years later, which, because the actual first published appearance of a creeper was in a promo card pack we made celebrating our 10th anniversary, the 10th anniversary promo card.
What creeper?
That was the radioactive potato.
Oh, right. Okay. I still can't believe that there's a potato in the main Flux game.
Well, it's because that stupid potato running joke at Origins that
I
one year.
know. Yeah, Origins, we were going every year. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was one of the most amazing things we've ever done, was those years at Origins running the big experiment with our fans. So much fun, such good stuff. And I don't even remember how it happened. There was an actual potato and one year, and somebody bought it a badge, or like made it a badge, like the potato was part of the whole thing, and there was some
the potato
whole
was entering
weird
the
thing going on
competition
all
somewhere.
weekend long about this potato that we
Yeah.
then made the promo card that was the radioactive potato.
Because it's a really hot potato. It moves around.
I got to get one. I don't. My Flux deck feels incomplete. I got to get a
Well,
radioactive
if you
potato.
get the newer edition of
Yeah.
Flux, it comes with a potato.
No. That was true. It was
Oh,
version
you're right.
4.
It's not true anymore.
In
my
version
goodness,
5,
right.
we took all the creepers out. So to get yourself a radioactive potato now, you have to get the creeper pack of expansion cards, which has death taxes and the radioactive potato, and the fourth creeper that is escaping my mind just now, War.
Well, I eventually want to come back to Chrononauts because I love Chrononauts, but I want to continue on this Flux realm for a little bit because I think that like it's been really interesting for me as a fan or a member of this community that I'm pretending I'm a member of. Just seeing that kind of evolve over time where
You are a member.
Thank you. I'm honored. But yeah, I go to my mall and I find my Iron Cross version of Flux and like, boom, I can play it with my friends. We can like, it's so exciting. And then, I hear that Zombie Flux hits the market and I grab it and it's got this new mechanic where if I pick up a card, oh man, I got to put it in front of me. Like that. And now I got to deal with this extra, mechanic. And then you guys kind of just hit this amazing pace of working with different licenses and working with different concepts to be able to come up with so many different versions of Flux. I think like in the last interview I heard, I think there was over 35 different versions.
More like 42 now.
Okay, that's what I thought. So 42 different versions, from Doctor Who Flux to Adventure Time Flux to I was just playing Batman the Animated Series with some students a few days ago. Wizard of Oz Flux, Cthulhu Flux, Star Flux. I have to be honest with you guys, which is when I started to see those, I was like, oh, cool. They just reskinned this game. And it wasn't until I think I picked up Wizard of Oz Flux and was playing it and was like, these mechanics are brilliant. Like there's the whole new way of thinking about the game based off of these licenses. And I'm curious about, like, Andy, you talked about how when you come up with a game idea, here's this fully formed thing. How do you guys work with licensors and come up with these mechanics that fit the game so well? Because I probably own 10 different versions of Flux and every one of them feels different.
It's not just a reskin. It's very much not. We put it there's a lot of versions, but that's because we're old and we've been doing this a really long time, right? They're not just quick reskins. There's a lot of work that goes into really coming up with things that really give it the flavor of whatever the topic is that particular game is. Like the zombies. Like you got zombies, like you got to deal with these zombies.
I have to study up on the lore and the licensors. You said, how do you work with the licensors? Licensors never help at all. Licensors are just pains in the butt. This is why lately we've stopped working with licensors again, because it's such a mixed bag. It's fun getting to play in somebody else's sandbox, but following their rules is always really irritating.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick before you go on, that Batman Flux that you say you own, don't give it away thinking you can go buy another copy. Very much out of print, very much not available.
And I just want to put out a call to anybody who's interested in that. Like that game is phenomenal. Like the way in which you guys use, so creepers, once again, cards that you sometimes can be a hindrance when you play, sometimes can be really cool. You guys used the lore of the Batman villains in such a great way in that game to utilize that card. Like as I was playing it yesterday, like I had this moment of elation where I was like, oh my God, like I am seeing this through a lens. It's so great.
Yeah, I should really try to get that license back, even just for a little while, to do another run, because there's so many people that wish they could buy Batman Flux.
But it's also a perfect example of how troublesome licensors can be, because some of my most aggravated experiences in working with licensors were on that game. And I still have, bitterness that I'll carry around. If you look at that game, why are they called Batman's cuffs instead of bat cuffs? It's just stupid. Why they wouldn't let me call them bat cuffs. In fact, they wanted me to call them just handcuffs. And I had to argue to at least call them Batman's cuffs instead of bat cuffs. So, and the one that kills me is though there was going to be a card, a new rule called Holy Blank Batman, and every turn you'd have to say Holy Remote Control Batman or whatever it is. That's something else, and no one had said Holy something Batman before, and they wouldn't let me put that in the game because in the Batman the Animated Series that's not a thing.
The
It's from
irony.
an earlier version of Batman.
Well, and you guys do have a card in that game, which is if you are wearing something with a bat logo, you get like an added function. So they did at least let you do something where that you could buy more stuff that would benefit them. So
Well,
that was
I did as much as I could, but it's aggravating, and I'd like to bring that one back, but at the same time, I worry that if we try it, they'll want to meddle with it even more.
interesting. Is that so? I'm going to shift this back just slightly, but like in 2012, you guys were able to then get Flux and Target, which seemed to be a pretty big account. And I remember like going and picking up, I think it was Cartoon Network Flux was what you guys had in there. Is your business model moving forward, like moving away from licenses, do you think, or just like whenever convenient you'll do them, or and kind of come up with more like Camping Flux, Eco Flux?
We're very deliberately staying away from licenses. I think we'll keep Monty Python forever just because it fits the game so well and it's such a good seller. So as long as we can keep that license, we will. But we don't make more. In fact, we make less on the licensed ones because of all the extra people you have to pay. They cost a couple dollars extra, but that doesn't make up for, all the costs involved. And they don't really sell better than the other ones. In some ways, the parodies are better. Like, because you get Starflex, which is a parody of all the sci-fi genres, right? And so you get to have all the different things in there. You don't have to just have Star Trek or, Hitchhikers or whatever. They're all there. And we have Fantasy Flux, which is, all a spoof on all of the fantasy stuff, right? And so those versions are actually better in lots and lots of different ways. They sell better, and we make more money on them, and we don't have to deal with all of the hassles that go into the licensing side of everything.
Yeah, and some of them are subtle. Like we came this close to making a Harry Potter Flux, and then the licensing all fell through. And like you said,
so close. We had an artist that
Yeah.
that Warner Brothers had approved that had done sketches. Like, we were making that game. Then all sorts of weird stuff happened from the way we were getting the license, and it all fell apart, and it got pulled. We couldn't make it.
Yeah.
So,
But at this point, like when we saw the like the backlash from the trans community over JK's politics, blah blah blah, like when we saw the video game released last year, and there's all this hate because of that. I'm like, I'm really glad in some ways that we didn't get in the middle of that.
Yeah, but it's always a bummer when you've done all this work and then you just watch it kind of wash
I
away.
have
It's
mixed
got a
feelings
beautiful
about it.
design. I'd love to publish it. If JK herself is listening, call us up. I'd love to publish it. It's a beautiful design.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit and then we'll spring forward to what you guys are doing now, which is Chrononauts is a game that I often when I'm teaching students game design and stuff, I will show them, if nothing more than just here's a grid of a timeline and here's a way to think about time, put it into a game mechanic, and then let's see where it goes. And I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about the development of that. For people who are unfamiliar, Chrononauts is a time travel game where you have a grid of cards. And you play different cards that allow you to change the timeline. Every player is trying to change the timeline in a way that will benefit them to win the game, or they're trying to collect objects to win the game. And it's just a fascinating. Whenever I play, I think I'm looking at dominoes in slow motion, like as you're sort of flipping things around. But like, how did that come to pass?
Okay, so I'm going to let Andy answer that, but I want to say one thing first before he gets into it, because it ties into the whole licensing question too. The reason we have so many Star Trek fluxes, I went after the Star Trek license because Andy wanted to make a Star Trek version of Chrononauts. And I wouldn't let him work on it because it was too much work. It was going to be a huge amount of effort on his part to figure out how to make that happen. And if I wasn't going to be able to publish it, I didn't want him spending that much time on a thing I couldn't publish. And so I went after and got the Star Trek license, and we started making fluxes while he then said, okay, and dug in to develop a second Chrononauts, which is basically it's Chrononauts, but in the Star Trek universe. Are you a
Well,
Trekkie?
it's a third one because there's also the Back to the Future
Okay, well,
version that's out of
oh,
print.
that's true. Back to the Future, we made a Chrononauts as well, but that's long out of print.
Yep.
So anyway, Andy, I'll let you answer. How do you develop? Because I know it's not easy. It's one of the hardest, most effort that has gone into any of his games is these time travel games.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously I love time travel. It's my favorite subject. I have a lifelong love of it. I've been collecting the lore, different stories that focus on key events. Like in the literature, there's a lot of stories of characters trying to prevent the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And then after 1963, those stories started to be about trying to prevent the assassination of JFK. And there's a lot of those. And it's just like, well, what are the alternate realities? Looking at alternate realities is so interesting. And so I'm not sure. I mean, again, this was in the late 90s when we're like, let's try to invent other games. And so I thought, I love time travel. Let me see if I can make a time travel game. And I had this vision of the timeline kind of like a calendar. We're very used to seeing a calendar as a presentation of about 30 entities of time. So I thought a game board that is kind of like a big calendar with events you can move back and forward on. At first, I think I know I did. First, I had this idea that it would be more like a board game, that you would have like an avatar character that would be on a particular year, and you'd kind of jump around from one year to another on the grid. And that idea fell by the wayside,
I'm
but
so glad it
eventually
did.
resurfaced in a later game I did called Time Breaker, which is also a time travel game, but very different, but similar in some ways. But then it's like, okay, I want to have, what if you could, go back and save JFK or whoever, or shoot, Hitler, obviously, classic trope. And then the other thing that you want to be able to do is go back and get stuff that doesn't exist anymore, and time rescue various lost artifacts or bring back some dinosaurs. So I had this idea of a kind of like a sitcom has three different plot lines all kind of going on at the same time, and they all converge at the end. So on the one hand, you're trying to change history to create the alternate reality that you came from, or on the other hand, you're just trying to collect up three interesting items from the future for some eccentric collector who wants some objects that only a time traveler could bring back. Or on the third one is just you work for the time repair agency. You're just trying to finish enough time repair paradoxes, finish repairing enough paradoxes, that is, to retire. And so there's like these three different ways you can win.
Yeah, I love the narrative of it. I mean, I think when I met you guys in 2012, Kristin, I remember you and I having a conversation about the fact that you said, whenever I play the game, I always try to save John Lennon. Like there's a component of the narrative of the game where, like, even if your direct goal is not to see what happens if Reagan dies, sometimes that's just what you want to do because that's the fun part of the mechanic, like that. I was literally just teaching about the 5 Ps of gamification to my students last week, and talking about the idea that play is the hardest one, getting people to just want to just exist in the sandbox. And I think Chrononauts does such a great job of, you've got very clear objectives, you've got a really interesting mechanic, but you're also just comfortable being in the game, as opposed to being so dead focused on, I need to win this thing, which is just really neat for that type of game.
Yeah, and there's lots of things in there that you can go and do that you want to do. You can save John Lennon, and you can go and legalize weed back in, I don't know what year did
1986.
1986. Like that
Yep.
didn't happen, but you can do it in the game,
Yep.
right? And there's both
Or
sides.
your favorite thing is
History.
preventing all the wars so that in 1945 we have world peace.
Yep, I like being able to play World Peace. Chrononauts is an amazing game. And there we have a new expansion. The rest of Row E is coming out May 5th, May 3rd, sometime in early May. And so it's been since like 2008 when we made the Gore Years, which was the beginning of that extended row, and we finally now are finishing the rest of the timeline. So it's a really good time to get into Chrononauts if you haven't played it yet. Flux fans who have not played Chrononauts, that is your homework. Go home, find yourself a copy of Chrononauts somewhere, and give it a try. It only
Well,
takes
you
like half
might
an hour to
want to
play, and
wait
you
till
get
the
the
new
main
edition
history.
comes out, because the new edition of Chrononauts is going to be in a slightly bigger box, large enough to hold all those expansions.
It's true.
Awesome. And you guys, you've got some other stuff going on. You've got a pyramid game called Jinx coming out as well that you guys were
Yep.
talking about.
Yep.
Yep, it's the latest in the pyramid line.
Yep. I think it's like 35th pyramid game, something like that. It builds on one of our other existing hits called Hijinks, which Kristin likes to give away copies of to people who can beat her at that game. But it's only a 2-player game, and so this uses some of the same engine of that game, but leverages it into a 3 or 4-player game, and it introduces the long-awaited gray pyramids that fans are eager to get.
It's really beautiful. It has black, white, clear, and gray.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's
got
a
a
monochrome set.
striking look.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
It's a
Well,
really pretty set.
one thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about today was, I've referenced community, and Kristen said I'm kindly a part of it, which is great. But it's one thing that I think is really cool, just about your company, is that usually board games, or the gaming industry, like Steve Jackson might be an exception, but usually there's multiple layers kind of to the game designer that's hidden. The board game industry and the tabletop industry has changed a lot in the last decade, where, I think those people are kind of coming forward, and there's a lot more narrative going on with like who's creating the games and what do they want. But you guys, since the dawn of your company, have always been so accessible, even to the extent where when you play certain versions of Flux, you're in it. You guys are characters, or when you play Lunacy, you guys are characters within that. And I've just always felt that, like, as a player, as somebody who, if I wanted to just go and buy some pyramids and design a game, like, you would be accessible to uh help get the word out there and make it a part of your narrative. And I'm curious about, like, how community has fit into the mission of Looney Labs over the years.
Oh my goodness, it's everything. Like from the very, very earliest days, the very first, we made 100, signed and numbered pyramid icehouse sets back, that we were selling at science fiction conventions in the 90s. And there was a little piece of paper in it that said, "Let us keep in touch." That was before email, before the internet, before any of that. And it was, "Give us your mailing address." And we collected a mailing list of fans of the game, that we made this newsletter called Hypothermia that had new games that other people had designed, and we were sending this out, physically in the mail to people. This is actually something that we learned to some degree really, really early on before we met. We were both on a mailing list for, this was in the 80s, Cosmic Encounter, and I'm sorry, not Cosmic Wimp Out.
Cosmic Wimp Out.
I was playing Cosmic Encounter then too, but Cosmic Wimp Out is a little dice game, made by these hippies in upstate New York, and it's an amazing, fun little game that I was addicted to in high school, that Andy was addicted to in high school, and they had a mailing list. And they would mail things out to physically mailing lists to people, and they would build that community and build that, and they would run tournaments, and they would do all this fun stuff. And when we met, we realized we were both on that list before we ever knew each other. Right. And so it was part of what we were doing from the very beginning, like intuitively, when we found somebody that loved our stuff, that wanted to play it, that anytime we met anybody, we would get them on our mailing list. We would get them on our list so that we could stay in touch. And so much of that is like why we do it. It's part of that. Our fans are our family, they're our people. And we love, bringing them joy and hanging out and playing games with them, and, teaching them and giving them new stuff that they're having fun with, so it's from the very, very beginning, it's been a big part, an important part of what we do.
Yep. I can only agree with all that.
One of the things that I love that you guys do is the holiday gift every year.
There you go.
I have a fruit cake in my Lunacy deck that
Nice.
came from one of those, and I love it for two reasons. One is because it's so intentional. You guys, every year you're so thoughtful with what is the thing that we can give back to our fans, and you know, it's very cute and it's very nicely delivered. But also number two is like I'm worried that you guys never stop thinking about game mechanics because every time I get it, it's like it fits like a glove. It is this perfect element to pop into a game. Like whenever I play Lunacy, you know, if I play it with students or play it with family or whatever, I'm like just so excited to get the fruitcake because it's like it has this added narrative to it and it just so seamlessly enters into the game. How big a part, like how much planning does it take to do this type of project annually?
I mean, we were always thinking about it. We just greenlit what this year's holiday gift is going to be like a week ago. We just made the determination, which is great. This is really early in the year to have a plan. So we can now, the marketing department can put a lot of work into it, make a lot of plans, going to really come up with what we're going to do and make sure we make a big splash with it. Sometimes, you know, it's coming down to the wire. What are we going to do? We need a holiday gift. What's it going to be? Right. And so it varies, you know, from year to year. Last year we actually had them printed in advance almost a year and a half early because we had switched gears and we had thought it was going to be the peanut butter and jelly pack. Did you get that one?
I did.
That was last year's holiday gift, and that one was going to be the holiday gift for the year before. And then we were broke. We just the thinking about the money it was going to take to mail them all out, and we had a new software system that I wasn't really ready to collect the names and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, I cried uncle and I said, Andy, can you make me something digital? Can you make me something that can be this year's holiday gift that we can do digitally so that we don't have to do all this extra stuff that I don't have time for or money for? And a couple days later, he popped out with an amazing thing like happens. He came up with rules for Solo Flux. And it's good. Have you seen this? It's so great. It plays really well. And you get, as a solo game, you get the feel of the deck. Like you can play through all of the different versions that you have, and you're playing that version of the game. Just like it's fun to play that version with other players, it's fun to play that version solo, and it's fun to play the next version solo, right? And so it's like the negative of it, of course, is that now every time we reprint, we have to change the rule sheet and the packaging because we're saying 1 to 6 players on the box because we're putting in the rules for Solo Flux. But lately he's been thinking, why did I invent
the Solo Flux rules?
Right?
It's
Because of that extra annoyance. But it's amazing. It's so good. It's so cool. And you know, that came out because I said, oh my God, Andy, can you make me something digital?
Yeah, when you said that, I said, well, I think I might have come up with something to finally make the solitaire version of Flux work. I'll see if I can make that. I'll see if I can finish that up. And you're like, oh my gosh, really? Like, yeah, I'll see if I can. And yeah, it did.
And it's so good. Like
It's awesome. I embarrassingly I haven't had a chance to try it yet. I was gonna do it yesterday, and I ended up in a project, and one of my students was at a game design project. I was like, I know what you're doing right now, and I just handed them. I think we did it with Batman Flux and did Solo Flux, and it was like I got this amount of points, and I think I figured it out, and it was like a really cool transition. Because once again, like it's not like you developed a mechanic where like player two makes random decisions or anything like that. Like the whole game is this different thing. It's a different way of viewing winning. It's, you know, and I just love the fact that like, I always feel like you guys put in 300% effort when people might expect 100. And that was one of those things where while I was watching her play it, I was like, okay, this is so much more complicated and brilliant than I was expecting.
It's really good. It's really, really fun. And literally just yesterday, I sent the art to the printer for making a playmat for Solo Flux. It exists already, but we finally it's selling so well that we're actually making a real run of it instead of doing them print on demand like we started. So not like you need it because you can just get the rules free on the internet, but the playmat is nice. You know, it gives you like something to pull out and set on the table and do. So it's also fun to play Solo Flux with friends. I know that sounds strange because you could also just play the full game if you have more people, but you can sit around a table and have 4 people each take a different version of Flux and each play Solo Flux at the table together, but individually. And it's a hoot. It's fun. It's like you're having all the fun of doing the solo version, but you're doing it with your friends. And if you own, you know, like I think you said you own 10 copies, different versions, right? So you can have 9 other people over and all play Flux together, but all play the solo versions of all your different versions. So
Well, That sounds great. I want to be mindful of your time. I really appreciate the chat. Just a couple last questions for you guys, which is I am curious about like you're based in College Park, Maryland. That is the home of Looney Labs. How has being in this part of the country like impacted the way you operate your business? Like are you guys do you find yourselves like feeding the culture of College Park? Or does like the culture of College Park kind of feed what happens in the Looney Labs? Like, I'm just curious if you guys are geographically oriented that way.
Not at all.
No, I would say not. I mean,
Not in the
we're
slightest.
College Park's just a standard kind of community. I mean, a university town. So we're just actually, our college is about to do a big article on us for the alumni magazine. But for the most
That's
part,
true. It
we're
might
just kind of
change after that because
yeah.
we aren't really
Ask
very
again in
known
a year,
in our local
but we
community.
just kind of
Yeah.
live here.
Okay. And then also, what's the makeup of Looney Labs like now? I think the last thing I'd listened to, you guys had like it was a 9 employee company. Like, what's it look
Oh,
like currently?
we're down to more like 5 or 6 at this point.
Yeah, we have 5 full-time and one part-time W-2 employee, and then 3 different very part-time 1099 folks that are maybe 10 hours, 20 hours a week kind of numbers. So it's smaller. Because the numbers are down. Like there's so many games in the world that the retailers can't keep everything on the shelf. And so, things like, Pirate Flux, which is, used to be a staple in every game store everywhere. Now there's a lot of different fluxes to choose from. And also there's just so many games to choose from, that, our sales are down a lot just from that. Now we're still selling games, but I can't support quite as big of a team anymore.
Yeah,
So,
and the pandemic didn't help, obviously.
yeah, the pandemic was definitely a whole thing.
Yeah.
So it hurt a lot of game stores, and that's who sells our games. So the game stores not being there to sell them or not having them on shelf significantly decreases our overall income.
Yeah, that'll hinder things just a little bit if people aren't
Yep.
buying Flux, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and we also used to go to a lot of events to do marketing of our games, direct to consumers. And obviously the pandemic really got in the way of that and hasn't really bounced back. So, we're looking for new ways to get our games out there, but it's not easy. And especially since, as Kristen says, there are just so many games out there now, along with so many other things attracting our attention and pulling us away.
Yeah, one little piece of marketing that I want to point out there that I think is really important is like I listened to an interview where you were talking about Pyramid Arcade, which is, Andy, I know that's like that's your magnum opus, I think, as you
Yep,
describe
that's
it.
what I call it. Yep.
And the price on that is how much currently? It was
88.
Yep.
$88. And, in the realm of board games, there's plenty of games that are cheaper than that. There's also plenty of games that are far, far more expensive. And
Yep.
I always you guys seem to be so cost conscious about the way in which you design games. Like you always want to make sure that there's a game that somebody can buy off the shelf for, $10 to $20, which I think is really cool. Like the MacGuffin game I just looked at is a $10 game, right?
I love that game.
And that's just like I just appreciate that so much about the way in which you guys operate business, whether that's intentional or not. Because I always feel like, if I'm coming up with a birthday gift for somebody or something like, oh, like this Flux game would really match with their personal interests, and it's something that you can find and pick off the shelf, and it won't completely damage your pocketbook. Like
Yep.
it's very
only
accessible.
$20. Yeah. Yeah. The $88 game is our most expensive game. And
By
you're
far.
right. Nowadays there's plenty of games of that price. When we first brought it out and it was 77, it was a little expensive. Like there weren't as many games that expensive then. And nowadays there's a lot more in that price range.
But it's
Um,
worth it because it's got 22 separate games.
Oh, it is worth it. This is the best thing we've ever made.
Yeah.
And we make a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, I love Pyramid Arcade. But I want to make sure we get in a mention here of the cool new thing that we're about to bring out in July called the Looney
Ooh.
Oracle.
Ooh, this is a surprise to me. What is the Looney Oracle?
The Looney Oracle is our new fortune-telling toy. No, it's our new decision-making toy, I should say. It's our new decision-making
toy.
Yeah.
And it has 80 cards, tarot-sized cards. It's not really a tarot deck because it's just 80 cards with beautiful art on them. And it has, we've been publishing games for 28 years, right? 30 years. So we have so much art that we own. And all of the art on all of these cards are from all of our games. So it's beautiful, gorgeous, deck of cards with all this beautiful imagery on it. And then it has these 12 round cards for when you want to ask a yes/no question, kind of like a Magic 8 Ball. And then it has another deck of 80 kind of fortune cookie kind of sort of advice kind of cards. So that you can either ask the Oracle for a more generic kind of advice on a subject, or you can ask a yes/no question. It's just a little device to consult the Oracle and ask a question. And we use it all the time now to answer silly questions that we can't, like we're on a Zoom call with the company at a morning meeting, and we're like, what are we gonna do? Let's ask the Oracle, right? Like deal out cards and do this fun little thing. Anyway, we're really excited about it. Cross your fingers for me. I'm hoping if I can put this in every toy store everywhere next to the Magic 8 Ball, I will hopefully then have more employees because I'll be able to afford them. Um, but we'll see.
Yeah, we have high hopes for the Looney Oracle. It's not quite like anything else you've ever seen, and everybody we show it to is like, "This looks great. Where can I get this? When's it? It's not available yet. Well, I want it now."
Yeah, and it's only $20, so it's accessible in a lot of ways. So we'll see. That is the big thing we're going to be working on this summer, really trying to get that out and get the word out, and and it's something that will allow us to get into different markets, into different places, because it isn't really it's not a game, it's a toy, and so it has access into different spaces, and it's good for gift stores and toy stores in places that don't necessarily sell games. So
That's awesome. Two questions. One is if somebody is interested in having your products, Looney Oracle, whatever, sold in their spaces, is it worth having them reach out to you directly, or is there another system for that? If anybody's listening is like, oh man, I have a store, I want to make sure I can sell this.
Oh yeah, no, find me. We're in distributors, a whole bunch of different game and toy distributors. We're on Fair, but you can just email retailers@loonylabs.com and we'll hook you up. Absolutely. We love our retailers. We would not exist without our retailers. There's people all over the world selling our games. And maybe a few less of them because there's so many games to choose from, but there's still lots of, like, pretty much every game store out there has some version of Flux on their shelf.
And it's available, and it's in multiple languages as well, right? There's a Spanish version and a
Yep.
German version, and
and all of it's available on our web store as well. So retailers can buy from us direct or from our distributors. So
awesome. And for future Looney Lab community members, where should they go? How do they find you guys online?
Well, so we're on social media on lots of different places on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. But Facebook is really where we hang out, like Andy and I hang out. So if you want to hang out where we're part of the conversation, then Facebook. We have several different fan groups. We have Flux Chatter, and we have the Starship Captains for the Pyramids. And so we have a couple of very, very active groups filled with people that love our games and love to talk about them. And we're in there answering questions and chatting with people and trying out new pyramid games that people invent and post in the groups. So, yep, very much so. And if you're a fan of our games and you want to do something wonderful for us, tell your friends. Teach people how to play them. They can buy them anywhere, right? They're all over. It's easy to buy my games, but you need to know about them. So telling other people and listening to this podcast and other things like it. And thank you, Ryan. We appreciate you giving us an audience and for playing our games and for loving our games. There's nothing that makes me happier than hearing a fan giggle about, oh my God, yes, this or that, or somebody was just telling me the story about they were playing Marvel Flux, and there's an arena card where you pit your different keepers up against each other, and you have to argue who's gonna win, right? And she was telling me how the card she had was Groot, and so she had to argue for why Groot would win, saying nothing but "I am Groot." And she was so excited that she won, that Groot won the battle because of, I don't know, she said "I am Groot" well enough, I guess.
Oh, that's amazing. She put Vin Diesel to shame.
Groot's pretty powerful too. He should win.
Totally. And I want to again thank you guys for being on the show. Is there any topics or any ideas that we haven't covered that you guys want to send out there before we depart?
Oh, I don't know. We talked about all sorts of things.
Yeah, the one I would have tossed in was the Looney Oracle, which I've already squeezed in. I guess I should pimp my own podcast, because Keith Baker and I do a podcast every other week called The Download, and I have my own blog site at wonderland.com, and those are soon. I'm going to launch a Patreon, I think, too.
Ooh, all the things are coming. And I just want to say one last thing, which is that, the world of game design is large and expansive. And for anybody who's interested, I think a lot of people, with my college students, they're like, I'm going to build video games. And then they're surprised when we're playing war and we're looking at the algorithm of war. And they're like, well, I thought I was just going to like program things to shoot things. And that's not how it works. You need to understand the bare bones stuff. And I want to just give another shout out just finally to, looking at the pyramid system, and if you are interested in game design and you want a place to start, there is so much documentation. There's such a supportive community, and the tools are magnificent. And you've got the whole Looney family to support you. So if you're interested in game design, if you're interested in kind of doing what the Loonies do, it's a great place to start.
Well, I can only agree with that. I always like to say the pyramids are like a deck of cards, and the deck of playing cards is the first place to go when you're trying to learn to create your own games, and the second would be a set of pyramids.
Yeah, and the book that comes in Pyramid Arcade has several challenges in the back.
That's right.
For game design challenges.
3 starting points for designing games that don't exist yet.
I love it. Well, guys, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting us.
Likewise.
This was fun.
What a fascinating behind-the-scenes glimpse. I'll never be able to look at NASA or Rubik's Cubes or computer security in the same way. I feel like Kristin might have completely developed the entire cybersecurity field. I applaud you, Kristin. Good job. If you are unfamiliar with Looney Labs after that whole conversation and you are mildly intrigued or extensively intrigued or just pure intrigued, go check out Looney Labs. Check out Andy and Kristin. They make themselves available. And for the game designers out there, you cannot ask for a better place to start. So check out Looney Labs. Check out Flux. Check out the Pyramid System or Pyramid Arcade. There's a million cool things you can do with that technology and with those game mechanics. As always, there's more fun coming down the pike. On June 5th, I've got Cayetano Valenzuela coming on the show. Internationally recognized muralist, sign painter, and most recently comic book artist. He's going to come on the show to talk about his journey as an artist, sort of discovering his own personality, coming to terms with himself, and then figuring out how to absorb himself in art. If you are at all familiar with the landscape of Central New York, you might know that one of the taglines is that we are the mighty Salt City, and that is a tagline that was developed by Cayetano in one of his pieces. So come back on June 5th to Meditations with Ryan Zlomek and give it a listen. If you like the show, please, please, please give it a rating, a review, give it a follow, or check me out on social media. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The World of Ryan Zlomek, where I talk about myself, my business, my podcast, obviously, and other shenanigans that are happening in my existence. Once again, that is The World of Ryan Zlomek on Instagram and Facebook. Don't be a stranger. And lastly, as always, make space for conversation because you just might learn something. Have a wonderful, amazing rest of your day.